Welcome to episode 5 of The Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. Rene Cormier, by his own admission, is an all-in kind of guy. A chance encounter with a group of globetrotting motorcyclists when he was a biology student led to a decision to sell everything he owned and, with a budget of $25 a day, set out to ride his motorcycle around the world. 5 years and 95,000 miles later, Cormier has some surprising views on the truths and misconceptions about giving it all up for the road. But before we dive in, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake lights, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Shall we dive in? So take me through the transition from biology student to world traveler. What happened?
Well, there's a few steps in between both of those parts of my life. The biology student, especially the biology student that finished up school here in Africa, well, I should say there's a couple of steps in between them, but they're all related because when I was a biology student, one of the neat things I did when I graduated from biology was to go and take an external studies program in Kenya with a Simon Fraser University, which is out of near Vancouver. And it was a phenomenal experience. It was a bunch of kids, 60 kids, university kids, taking university level courses on biology, anthropology, evolution, wildlife management, wildlife behavior, animal behavior. It was really great, and we had this classroom with a generator and those little overhead projectors that you wrote on, and it went through the mirror and onto the big screen. And then this is 1992, so technology was as it was back then. But while we were there, we were traveling a lot in these minibuses, all the kids crammed into these 6 or 8 minibuses. And I remember distinctly seeing some motorcycles go the other way on the road that we were traveling one day. And they were overloaded to the gunnels. They had extra fuel. They had what I assumed was tent stuff and boxes and bags and all sorts of stuff hanging off the motorcycle. And I thought that was a really interesting way to travel. And I had never considered motorcycles to be used as a form of sort of exploratory travel up until then. You know, I had come from a bicycle background and bicycle racing and working in bicycle shops, and always keen on motorcycles, but never had the money to get one. So, but when I saw that thing, I thought, geez, you know, like I know trials motorcycles, I know dirt bikes, I know cruisers, I know Harleys, I know that kind of stuff. But I didn't know that people were using bikes to travel like this. And that resonated with me for a brief second while we were stuck in those minivans. And that was to remain there for quite a long time until, fast forward 5-10 years, until I had enough money to buy my own first motorcycle. And it was actually, it was the same bike that I saw there in Africa, which was red and white BMW R100 GSPD. You know, was it that memory that created that buying impulse decision? Most likely. And people ask, you know, why BMW? I said, well, I mean, you got to pick something. So I might as well pick something that had a bit of a romantic connotation for me from seeing it in Africa. And that was my first BMW, that bike way back then. I think there's probably 8 or 10 years between those two occurrences. But the fact that there was biology and motorcycles, they are, you know, for the most part, rather unrelated. The biology degree never made $1 in my life, and it turns out the motorcycle has been my career for the last 15 years. So, and that part, they're complete opposites.
So you saw these motorcycles, and something resonated. And sort of, it took a long time. And then, what in your life actually led you to want to go around the world? Because back then it was less common. Now it's, as we were talking off air, it's a relatively common thing now, relatively. But what led you, and this is the thing that I always strikes me about, you know, the round the world thing, which is that is it sort of a completist mindset that one takes? Is it that, you know, it's there, it must be done, like a mountain, it must be climbed? Or is there a notion of getting away from your own culture or fleeing something? I never know if people are going to something or running away from something.
No, I mean, for me, it was. I won't be so lighthearted to say it was a laugh, but I have a history of taking on things that are probably decided when my energy is high, and then I just go for it. You know, I went from racing bicycles to doing triathlons, and from going to do triathlons to doing Ironman, and then doing Ironman a bunch of times, including Hawaii. And then that phase kind of shifted into motorcycles. And then, but I was working at at Rock Shops, which was a rather large mountain bike company in the United States. And my job was moving to Chicago, because our particular part of Rock Shops was being moved to Chicago. And I told them that I would have no problem living in Chicago. I think I could live anywhere, but I don't know if my position would have actually meshed well with the new organization. So I said, I'm going to take off at the end of the calendar year. I'll help replace myself. We'll do in the interviewing, and I'll hire the best person I think I can. And then I took off, and they weren't going to give me allowance for my vacation time, so I had to use that time up. So I took a motorcycle up to Alaska, and that was my real first long multi-week trip. I think I was around for 3 weeks. And while I was in Alaska, and this is to get around to answering the question, I met two guys from Colombia, South America, that were up there independently, but they had kind of bumped into each other on the way up, and they traveled for a few weeks for the last northern bit. And we got talking in a ferry lineup, and I asked them, I said, hey, you guys are kind of a long way from home. What are you doing up here? And they both told me independently that they were from Colombia. They'd always dreamed to be up in Alaska. And so they took a year off, and away they go. And the question eventually came around to me as well. And they said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I kind of quit my job, but I've got to use up this time. So I've come up here to see what it's like. And I'm kind of in love with this idea of using a motorcycle to explore places. Certainly northern Canada, northern US were the lowest hanging fruit from where I was in Colorado at the time. And I left that meeting thinking, geez, you know what, maybe I should just go do what these guys are doing, right? I can just take a year off. I can go down to South America. I was working in America with a TN visa, so I wasn't able to stay down there and look for new work according to the visa regulations. So I knew I had to come back to Canada anyway. So I knew the house needed to get sold. I had to get rid of all the furniture, all of that kind of stuff. So things were looking pretty good for this sort of big trip to South America. And 1 year it didn't seem like that big organizational challenge, or like it's not going to the moon. It wasn't going around the world quite yet. But as I got closer to Colorado Springs on the return trip, I kept thinking, like, just maybe this is the time where the trip around the world can happen. And I had no, up until that return trip, I had zero thoughts about doing a trip around the world. So I had no idea what it cost. I mean, is it $10,000? Is it $100,000? Is it $1 million? I have no idea. And what does riding around the world mean? I mean, it's a catchy phrase, but can you do it in a month? Can you do it does it take a year? Does it take 5 years? I don't know. But it gave me something to sink my teeth into as I'm winding down my formal job area. And at the time, this is now 2002, you know, Horizons Unlimited was a website that was up and running, and there was a few people doing, I mean, there's always been people doing big trips around the world since forever. But 2002, there were only a few people that were putting the stories up on the internet. Chris and Aaron Rattay were two that I remember very well, and they were doing a great job of putting their budgets up and putting their timelines up, and I read all of their stuff many times, and that's when the ideas first started to sink in. And I think to my credit, and growing up, my folks had never dissuaded me from doing anything dumb. Not injury dumb, but you know, if you want to do a big trip, go for the big trip. My first overseas trip, I was 17. My mom came back from in the car. She said there was an ad on the radio for a seat sail down to Mexico, and you should go. So that was on Thursday. I left on Saturday. No language skills, no money, no nothing. And so 17 in Mexico by myself, and you sort it out. But so they didn't discourage it, and it just kind of fell into place. And then once I kind of fell in love with the idea. Now this is, keep in mind, this is a year and a bit before Long Way Around launched. So that whole tsunami of this new genre of adventure motorcycling hadn't been sort of brought to TV and to DVD like they so successfully had in the years to come. So there's still a bit of flailing on my side to get it done. But like anybody who goes on an overnight trip or a week-long trip or month-long trip, I got a lot of things wrong, but with error and fixing it and corrections, you kind of find your way.
To ride around the world or to go on an epic trip, what is it that most of us that haven't done it misunderstand about it? There's got to be things that recur, because if I road race and someone doesn't road race, there's lots of things that they don't comprehend. So what is it about around the world or these epic trips that the rest of us don't get?
Well, I think one of the things that's important to realize is that it doesn't need to be as macho as it sounds. And I have run into travelers who they're, I travel with a budget of $25 a day. And I got to that budget from looking at Chris and Aaron's budget and seeing that they were running $35 or $40 a day and thinking that's pretty gratuitous. I'm pretty sure I can run a 25. So 25 became my budget. And I just had to live to that. But that's pretty thin. Now, keep in mind, this is 2002, 2003. But I was running into travelers who were from hotel to hotel, and you could almost call it a pub run through some of these places. So I think traveling around the world comes with this cloak of macho-ness, of sort of a Marlboro Man kind of experience and trying to get to places that no one has ever been before on a motorcycle. But the fact of the matter is it's well traveled most of the places. I traveled for the most part alone, so I was not comfortable going with half a tank of gas down a dodgy road, in case I had to get myself out of this pickle. And that was one of the upsides of traveling like this, is that you are 100% responsible for getting yourself out of any sort of situation. There was no sat phone for me anyway. I didn't travel to sat phone, no cell phone. And so you were relying on old school travel techniques, which is if you need help, you ask for help. But I was kind of amazed after having been on the road for multiple years that it could be as easy as you really wanted it to be. You just had to throw more money at it.
Is there a responsibility when you travel to the cultures that you travel through?
Oh, yes, there is. Yeah. And this answer is not limited to those of us on two wheels and engines. This is two-wheel travelers. This is anybody. Well, I think this could be brought into as intimate as your neighbor in your local county or your province or your state, or internationally. But that process of getting a visa into your passport that allows you to enter into country B is basically a guest welcoming piece of paper that allows you to come and explore and learn about the place that you want to go and learn about. You are not being forced to be there. You are being welcomed there. And this is a voluntary thing, of course, that you are there to explore. And I think as a good neighbor would be, it's great to ask questions. It's good to listen more as a general rule than it is to ask questions, I think. And to learn and share stories, talk similarities, and to leave challenging conversations to appropriate times, even if that appropriate time comes up. It might not, if that country has had a difficult history, or political or religious chats can also be on the tops of slippery slopes sometime. And I think that's maybe a bit more difficult now with people trying to create content for shows when they're looking for something amazing or wow or scintillating for a feed, for a video, for example, which I don't think happened in the days of Volkswagen and horseback riders or pre-internet. But to try and get a glimpse of people's backstories and the places they come from. And one of the things that I think is challenging for us is, as travelers, is we sometimes get to a place where we want the romanticized version of what that place was. And we want it always to remain like that so we can experience it the way that we saw it in National Geographic when you were reading those magazines that came to the house when you were a kid or the neighbor had them. But at the same time, everywhere that we're traveling wants the same thing that the rest of the world wants. But they want internet connectivity, they want mobile phones, they want all of that stuff. And some part of you is going to say, "Eesh, it's a shame that they haven't held on to their old traditions of herder, shepherd, hunter, gatherer, whatever, wherever you happen to be." But at the same time, who are we to deny folks the same chance of getting progress and technology to make their lives easier that we may have had already for a little while? So the culture thing is a difficult one, and that's part of the reason why we travel is to make sure that we see these things and to ask ourselves, why is it different from where we are? And when we do these guided tours, for example, here in Africa, well, in most places, the last sentence of my little introductory spiel to folks on day one is that, for the Africa tours anyway, is that our job is not to fix Africa. Africa runs just perfectly the way Africa does. Now, it can be your job to sit on tour with your motorcycle helmet on to wonder, why is it that they do the things that they do? And I'll caution people and say, listen, you're going to say to yourself, I promise you're going to say to yourself, if they just did it faster, more on the left, more on the right, up, speed it up, slow it down, start earlier, finish later, whatever the case is, it will be speedier, faster, more efficient, more economical, whatever the case is. But that's not the solution that you need to figure out. What you need to figure out is, why is it not like that? Why is it running the way it is running? Because it's obviously working for this local situation, and that's it. So our job is not to fix the situation. Our job is just to wonder why it is the way it is. And that's probably part of the value of traveling in these places and having these, and traveling by motorcycle, where it is a bit of a moving meditation. And it's one of the reasons why we do motorcycle tours, and we would not do very well at bus tours because that's not our crowd. But we need time to digest what we see, and the motorcycle helmet is the perfect place for it. We don't run comms between the helmets, so at least with guides and groups. So if you see it, you get to ruminate on it, and we can discuss it at dinner. That's for us in sort of a group setting. That's a wonderful way to see it, chat about it at night, and then see stuff the next morning.
Let's go back to your trip around the world. And we didn't really talk about it thoroughly, but when did you start? What was your route? Just sort of touching some high points.
Sure.
How long did it take? And then what ultimately, I think this question is key, is what did you take away from it, and what have you taken away from it in the years since?
Sure. Well, we can start with the sort of mechanics of the trip. So based on the research from Chris and Aaron, for example, and other people on the internet, my budget was $25 US a day. I sold everything that I could. I didn't have a lot of money, but I had a house that had a little bit of equity in it. Then I sold bicycles, clothing, other motorcycles. I started with a budget of $35,000 US, which isn't a ton of money, but that's what I had. So if you do the math, the $25 a day over a year brings me to $9,000 and change. So I figured I had 3 years of traveling money, plus a little bit left over for, maybe moving a motorcycle, over the Darien Gap or something like that. And then I started traveling. And at the end of 2 years, 2.5 actually, I'm still in South America. So I realized that I'm traveling much slower than I expected to, but I felt that the pace was right. So I didn't want to speed up the pace that I was traveling at, but I knew that I had to go back to Canada to make more money for me to continue the rest of the trip. So when the trip finally finished, it was 2.5 years for North Central South America, and then another 2 years of Africa, Middle East, Pakistan, Iran, the Stans, Russia, Mongolia, South Korea. And when I got to South Korea, the plan had originally been to continue through Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand. But I knew that that would have, at my pace, that would have been another year or two, and I just didn't have the money for that. And I was getting less. It was pushing me less to try and figure out how to get the money. And I kind of resolved the fact that, I'd done what I had set out to do, which is to drive around the world, again, whatever that means. And so I put the bike into a crate in South Korea, shipped it to Long Beach, flew over, picked up the bike, and then drove to Vancouver, and that was the end of it. So the whole trip was 4.5 years traveling in a 5.5 year period, 1 year in the middle to make a bit of money, and 145,000 kilometers or so, 100,000 miles approximately. And as far as the takeaways, I mean, they still continue to resonate. That a big trip like that continues to resonate now, 20 odd years later, 15 years later. And most of it centers around, in that 100,000 miles, there was no threat of personal injury to myself. There was nothing stolen from the motorcycle. There was no one ripping me off at a gas station, at least that I know about. I mean, if they did a great job. I still don't know about it. And that is, and that for me is the biggest takeaway. And when we do talks for rallies or dealerships, that is the ending point. It's like, listen, like, I know that when we do the question and answer after the talk, the first question is going to be, or at trade shows, the first question is, where did you get mugged? It's not even a question of did you or did you not. It's where was it? And so I'm just me in the booth saying, listen, I'm not sure where you got your data, but here's my data. I'm just one guy, but this was my trip. It was this many kilometers or this many miles, and this is not what happened to me. So I think it's some valuable data, and I hope that they can take it back. And I should put a little asterisk beside that, in that there was an incident where there was a bullet hole in the gas tank, and that was from America. And but I'm to the point now where I actually don't tell that story too much, and I try to avoid telling it at all at these talks when we talk to BMW dealerships or rallies or those types of things, because what I don't want to have happen is someone's in the audience and I tell the story, and then they go home and say, hey, you know what? I listened to this funny guy from Canada talk about going around the world and he got shot at, and then end of story, and they move on to what are they going to watch on Netflix that night. That is the incorrect message for anyone to walk away from a 4.5 year trip, is to have that little insulated, awkward incident. It does a great service to everyone who put me up for the night or let me camp in their backyard, or people that lent me tools or made me tea, or like, there's just so many moments of graciousness and love afforded to a foreigner who they will never see again. And for someone in the audience to walk away with this sort of little soundbite of an episode that was really inconsequential to the trip is a sad move. So I've stopped talking about it.
Let's jump to the present a bit more. You lead tours in Africa, and what is it that drew you to Africa, and what is it that keeps you going back to Africa?
Well, it was initially a girl. So on my halfway around the world, my second part two of this trip around the world started in South Africa and went to South Korea. And while I was in South Africa, in Cape Town, actually I'm in Cape Town right now, and not far from here, I met a girl at a barbecue, and we got chatting, and she was fantastic and cute, and we had a date on the motorcycle, and then we had this little traveling fling for a month while I was waiting for the weather to change and for me to proceed up into Northern Africa, well, Central Africa. And that was going to be it. It was, I still have 2 years of traveling or so to do. She has got a family and a job and everything else here. So I left, and lots of tears, but it just never stopped. At this point I had a cell phone, not for communication, more for the calculation, like an old Nokia phone for the calculator when I'm doing money transactions at the border and stuff. But I could use SMS texting. So we texted a lot and we visited a lot. And then when my trip finished, I decided to fly back to Cape Town to visit her and try and convince her to come to Canada and check it out. Because now it's like, okay, we need to do something with this relationship, or we must stop it, because this is as long distance and as ridiculous as it could get anywhere in the world. So she came back to Canada in January, which wasn't, the best selling time to come to Canada, but that's when the trade shows were. So she had to work at the trade shows. And then we decided, okay, let's give it a go. So we got married within 2 months to start the visa process. And that was in March of 2010. And then we needed a job to do. So we found someone local here in Cape Town who could help with backup driving, and we got a couple of routes. And I had written the book by that point. So I was going to be at the trade shows anyway, selling the book. So it wasn't going to be too much of a hardship to just put a flyer beside the book and saying, hey, if you're interested in a guided tour of South Africa and Namibia, that was the first tour we did, let's do it. And we did everything wrong. We priced it wrong. The distances were wrong. We learned a lot that first year. And I must say that, thanks to Ewan and Charlie, who had finished the year before, a year and a half before, I fell into some very fertile ground for everyone talking about adventure, anything. So I'm quite thankful for those guys' project and the professional way that it came off, and how widely it was accepted as, hey. And I was like that kid in Africa with the university group. It's like, there's a lot of folks going, hey, this is a cool way to see a new part of the world that I didn't know happened. And you could do that adventure with a small A and by staying in hotels, or you can do a big A by camping and going off road and sand roads and the rest of it. But it just opened up this whole big area, which was super cool. So we ran tours. This is our 15th year in Africa, and we started with 2, then we went to 4, and then 5, and then 6. And now we're at quite a few in Africa, but we're also running in Scotland now, New Zealand, South America, Canada, Mongolia. Typically places that I like to travel on my own, and places with not a lot of people and big landscapes. Those are the areas that I like personally traveling. So those are the areas where the tours ended up.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. Now, since we're in the middle of chatting about riding around the world, and since much of the world has dirt roads, let's talk riding off-road. Near as I can figure, and I'm no expert in the dirt, but what you need to have to ride off-road is trust. Not trust in your own skills, that's not it at all, but trust in the gyroscopic effect of 2 wheels rolling, and that a motorcycle would much rather be upright than on its side. They're no different than the rest of us. Now, on pavement, you can ask a motorcycle direct questions. Go here, go there, do this, do that, brake now. But in the dirt, you make suggestions. Your eyes are more valuable than your hands, and don't get in the way. As riders, we're often giving our motorcycles bad information. We're tight, we're tense, we're not sure of our own skills. And what we end up doing is confusing, but is a naturally elegant machine. I've seen bikes pitch riders off and then roll happily down the road without anyone at the controls. Now, it ends badly, but that's not the point of this. Think of it this way, like a bull in a ring. I'm no bull rider. I don't even ride horses. But wouldn't it be better to work with the bull than to work against it? And the dirt is exactly the same thing. Be loose, except that control isn't a birthright. And most importantly, wear really good protective clothing, because you're going to fall far more often than you'd like to. With over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. For those of us who would be considering a tour like yours or a competing tour, what's the best advice? Because I know you get riders of different skill sets, and how do you deal with that? And how do you make sure that everyone has a good time when those of us coming have such different expectations? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, managing expectations is 99% of what we do. And for us as a guide-owned company, we don't rely on outside agencies to sell. We don't have travel agents taking commissions. The best thing that we can do is we can be at the trade shows, we can be at rallies, talking about, is this trip right for you? Because we'll get people who come up and they say, hey, I want to go to Africa or New Zealand or Canada or wherever, and I love to do a full tank of gas before breakfast, and I like to ride till sunset. And we're like, that's awesome, but you're gonna not like a guided tour. So we can talk about something private for you, but do not come on a guided tour because it's not for you. And I think some people self-seed them a little bit because the trips it's not a budget vacation. And so I think some people will self-seed themselves when they look at the price and they see how the price, in addition to the airfare, in addition to being away for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The trip that we just finished is 6 weeks long. So it can be a significant time investment as well. So having guides answering the questions on, is this trip right for me, is important. It is a noticeable quirk that men are a terrible adjudicator of their skills. And typically that starts with, hey, I'll tell them that the route has got gravel roads. Oh, that's not a problem. I rode dirt bikes as a kid. And I tell everyone at the trade shows, like, okay, when you hear that line, and then you got to dig a bit deeper, because that might be the case that was the last time they were on a motorcycle, or, you know, they were 14 years old and that was on a little YZ80 or something like that. So the more question and answer we do at the trade show level helps prevent people from not being mixed up in the group, and that's critical to having a fun group. Now, we are mostly North American riders. That's because we mostly market to North America, and so we don't have too much of a language barrier on that one. That's quite fun. And the other part of it is just we just ask people to be flexible. You know, you're going to be having dinner with the same people for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 6 weeks. So let's not launch into politics or religion debates on night one. Let's save that for the day after the tour. That's how we phrase it on day one. You're welcome to talk about anything on the day after the tour, and then fly at it in the airport lounge as you guys are flying home. But we're here on vacation, and we're here to ride.
When you were on your round the world trip, 4.5 years of solo travel with a woman somewhere in there, of course, that's required. But did you feel that this was part of your life, or did you feel that you were stepping outside of your life? Did you get lonely during that time?
God once. No. And lonely, you know, alone is different from lonely. And I was alone for most of the time. And just to be clear, I did travel with a girlfriend for 4 or 5 months in South America. She was from the States. She broke her leg in an accident. She went back to the States. Her leg healed, but the relationship never did. So I continued the rest of the tour on my own. But never lonely. There's always so much to do as far as keep writing my journal. I wrote in the journal every night. I kept track of my finances as best as I could. Working on the motorcycle was very therapeutic at a campsite. So I was never at a point of being lonely. And as far as being my life, it was my life. And another question people will ask, you know, wasn't I homesick? Well, there was no home to be sick for. That was gone. It was like the story of people burning the boats when they got over to the shore of the new place. That easy chair was gone. My comfortable bed was gone. The bed frame was gone. All the cutlery and the crockery and all that stuff. So there was no homesickness place to be homesick for. My home, everything that was required to make me happy in life was about 1 meter wide and 3 meter long. That was it. That's all I had. So as far as minimalism, fantastic. As far as making use of what you've got around you, fantastic. I mean, these are all the lessons that you read on cute little Facebook posts, self-help posts, or those motivational posts. But that was my life for 4.5 years, and it was glorious. It wasn't always clean. It wasn't always, you know, in the order. You know, you could tell people first coming on tour because their bikes are clean and sparkling, and their equipment is all new. And my jacket, which was at the time was an Aerostitch Darien jacket, I left, and it was this neon high vis yellow. And I finished the trip, and I'm more like lemon meringue pie, a bit of yellow, not so safe anymore. And but that was it, and I loved every bit of it. There was hard days, and there was days when you were sick, although not as many as you would imagine. But days when things weren't working well with visas or with structural things that you couldn't, like I was stuck in Dubai for 2 or 3 months trying to get a visa. Those kind of traveling problems. But for the vast majority of it, I woke up every morning considering myself very fortunate to have been able to make that leap. And I must say now, I'm 54 now. So I left when I was 33. I finished when I was 39. That was my age during the trip. And now, 54 with 2 kids, 8 and 11. And now I can appreciate why, when I was talking about the trip when I first returned and selling the book, people were quite amazed that someone would be able to do this. And now I understand their wonder. Like, so to take my position now from having a mortgage and a dog and chickens and 2 kids and to think of myself leaving all of that to go do a trip around the world, that seems like a colossal amount of work and planning. And I don't know if I would have been able to do it in my current, in my current life state. So I tell people I retired twice. I retired once at 33 with a little bit of money, spent all that. And now I'll retire again at, I don't know when, 93 for the second time after giving it a test run the first time. But zero regrets on that first run.
And when you returned home after the time on the road, were you like a returning GI that couldn't reintegrate into society? How difficult was that to rejoin the world that you'd left behind?
It was weird because I'd spent, a number of years avoiding media, especially the last couple of years before coming back to Canada. So I'm in Russia, I'm in Mongolia, I'm in the stands, I'm in places where English wasn't the first language. So billboards, I didn't see billboards, I didn't read advertising. I was out of all of that sort of messaging environment. And I get back to Canada and I'm like, why are all these billboards like yelling at me all the time? Like they're everywhere in these newspapers. I'm driving, like, doesn't anybody see how all of this stuff is like just hammering you with messaging? And of course they don't, right? Because that's the way it was yesterday and the way it'll be tomorrow. But I do remember getting back at 39, zero money, and people are buying their second house, and people are buying a cottage, and they're buying a boat, and they're buying, extra stuff. And I'm thinking, did I actually make the right call here? Shouldn't the 30s be for career climbing and getting a promotion and slowly working up the corporate ladder? And that was a good 3 to 6 months of not turmoil, because what could I do about it at that point? There was no recourse at that point. And now that's when I was writing the book. So I would get up at 4, I would write for a couple of hours, go do construction in the day, and then come back and write. I was living in a friend's basement, unfinished basement at the time. And but after the book was written and Colette came over, and we got married and settled into this wacky thing of bringing folks on rides in amazing places around the world, then it started to settle in. It's like, okay, especially with Colette's support, right? She's like, it's a ridiculous adventure, but let's give it a go. And we hopped in a truck and we did dealer talks all across Canada and America. And then our oldest boy was born, and we did the same thing again, back and forth across Canada and America, and staying in the most terrible hotels. But I think that's why Jacques has such a good immune system. He was bathed in these bathtubs of hotels that people should not be in, but I think he's got a great immune system because of it. And that was our little ridiculous life. And it's gotten a bit more stable since then, thankfully. And now we're settled into a little house in Summerland, British Columbia, which is in the Okanagan Valley of BC. Loving it there with great friends, and very happy with the way we ended up. So if I could do it again, I would do it identical to what I did before. Not taking any more money. I think doing it on the cheap as I did was one of the ways that you're kind of forcing yourself to keep it real, because there is no other option. You can't, as much as it would be nice to get a hotel with a shower and have someone do your laundry for you. You think about it for 5 seconds and it's okay. Well, here's my tent and there's the river. I'm going to go do laundry in the river like I've done all the time. So traveling with a thin set of thin cash and a little bit of support, what for me was ideal. And I'm glad I didn't travel in the age of the internet. I think that I'll consider myself fortunate for that one. I suppose you could do it traveling now and just not use the internet, but I think that would be quite tricky to do, I suppose.
Rene, you wrote about your experience traveling around the world, and can you tell us a bit about the book and if it's still available?
The trip was never designed to generate a book. That was nowhere in the cards until about year 4, where I met a guy in Africa who had a little tiny book that you would make on that you would do for your friends and family on a trip to Mexico, for example. You know, it's got a hardcover and 10 pages of color photographs in there. And he showed me one that he did for a trip that him and his mates did on the bikes. And I thought, that's a pretty clever way of telling people about what you did without having to re-go through the word story every time. And so I liked that idea. And then the other part that he says that, you know, it was inexpensive to do. And that also came at a time when I started to realize that the fact that I was having such a good time traveling, meaning no drama with things going wrong, was largely to do with people sharing information to me. Like, hey, Rene, make sure you check out this road. Make sure you use this border crossing, not that one. You know, say hi to this person, change your money here, not there. So I was a recipient of a lot of great data that I had got on the road. And I thought to myself, maybe it's going to behoove me a little bit to kick the can down the road by putting all the stuff that I learned, warts and all, into a book. And so the last 6 months, I started to cobble together stories that I had written for a magazine article or for a website, in addition to all of the journals. So I had 11 journals that I had compilated through this trip of mine. So I had gotten home and I got a friend from RockShox to help me lay it out. It's 160 pages because, as the book people know, it has to be divisible by 4 for the press. And it was 8.5 by 11 landscape, which is the cheapest way to make the paper. The magazine bookstores hate it because they can't stick it on edge and it takes up too much shelf if they put it outright. So they don't care. They don't care too much for it. But as I explained to the designer, we're not designing the book for the bookseller. We're going to design it for someone's coffee table or my mother, who I thought was going to be the only person to buy the book.
We've all seen the images, Rene, of Everest and people climbing Everest, and there's a endless line of people going up and an endless line of people going down, something that only the very fittest and ruggedest might have done in the 1950s or 60s. And now my accountant climbed Everest. Is in any way adventure touring on motorcycles, is it going in that direction?
Well, I think you could probably separate out the guided tour aspect of it and the solo part aspect of it, because you'll get guys like Ed March who are doing solo trips on a C90 into all the forsaken places on the planet, and I think a lot of the folks who are doing more or less like the mountain climbing of Edmund Hillary days, there's lots of them out there. But the problem is you will never hear about them. They're not doing a blog. They're not going to write a book. They're doing it to see that, you know, could you call them the more sort of the archetypal traveler of old? So those could be in one category. And you could say that for the people that are climbing Everest with a guide that they paid a lot of money to get them onto the mountain and up to the top, you could probably make a corollary to guided travel. And although we're not that strenuous, of course, we just like running itineraries and staying in nice hotels and running on roads that have a lot of beautiful things to look at. But again, that's not much different from someone joining a bus tour as well. You can join a bus tour and have visiting all the places that you want to see. Although a bus tour would drive me nuts, but if that's the only thing available to you, and you know. I don't think I could come from a high horse and saying, you know, it's not a proper way to see the world if the only thing you can do is if you've got a cane and you've got a bad hip, and the only thing you can do is get on a bus tour, but you really want to see the Namib Desert and you want to see Victoria Falls. man, then go for it. I mean, the fact that your mobility is restricted cannot be, I cannot say don't do it, right? That would be quite ignorant of me to tell people not to have an opportunity to see the same fantastic things that folks have seen, even though they may have done it in a different way. So, I mean, and tourism is one of the really large drivers of GDP down here, and I think we have to encourage tourism. And I think I need to, as a tourist person, be able to encourage people to travel in any way that they can. And if that includes throwing money at it to make it easier for them, then great, go for it. I mean, at the end of the day, and this comment has been made about Ewan and Charlie for the long way around as well. I mean, at the end of the day, they chose to do a motorcycle trip through some dodgy sections, through some troubling sections to Mongolia and the eastern part of Russia, which were not easy traveling. And they could have spent it in the Mediterranean on a boat, fishing and eating fish tacos and drinking caviar or whatever the rich people do. So full credit to them for doing it, you know. And I think I can extend the same thought to people traveling. If they want to go somewhere, man, just they've got to go. And for us on the motorcycles, you know, it's sometimes when we pull up to the same. There's a couple of famous fuel stations where we pull up dusty and dirty and sweating because we're in the desert now of Namibia, and the bus pulls up, and invariably there's someone that gets off the bus and runs right over to the motorcycle and starts talking motorcycles. You know, I've got this bike at home, and I can't tell you how great it looks for you guys to be out here, and I wish it was on the motorcycle instead of the bus, but you know, I'm here with whoever they're here with. But I think for them, they're there because they need to be there. That was the condition for being on the bus. You know, maybe they'll come back on a bike. Maybe they'll come back on their own. But yeah, I just think that travel is in general, as an overarching comment, is good for the world. It's good for people to see how other folks live. I think it's good to see why things are not the same back home, and I think it's good in general to be. The word ambassador is a bit played out at the moment, but just to be a kind person from another country visiting wherever you are and leaving kind words, kind comments, thank yous, pleases, buying coffee for the person next to you at the coffee shop that's telling you stories, like little tokens of kindness. I think that goes a long way to gluing up the world. There's a lot of divisiveness in the world going on. I think these little one-on-one communications can it's not going to change it in a gross sense, but in a human sense, I think it'll go a long ways for patching up some stuff. I think so anyway.
Rene operates Renedian motorcycle tours in Africa and elsewhere. Find him at renedian.com. In closing, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.